Summary. Chapter 0. Why Focus Matters. In the opening of Hyperfocus, Chris Bailey reminds us that our attention is always on something, and learning to steer it can transform both productivity and creativity. He emphasizes that constant connectivity, like having a smartphone or internet always within reach, is one of the worst enemies of our focus. Bailey illustrates this by noting that he sometimes leaves his phone at home just to write in a diner without interruptions. By removing the phone and disconnecting Wi-Fi, he forces himself to commit to the work at hand. As he puts it, achieving creativity often means doing the opposite of focusing. One of the best ways to foster creativity and additional productivity is learning to unfocus, to step back and gain some space, uninterrupted by something vying for your attention. In practice, that might mean deliberately doing nothing and letting the mind wander. For example, enjoying a quiet moment listening to birds or clouds, which paradoxically can help solve problems that aren't being directly worked on. Bailey also cites research to highlight how rare sustained focus is. Studies have found that on a computer, the average person only manages about 40 seconds of focused work before getting distracted. He distinguishes between interruptions, external events that steal our attention, and distractions, the ones we create ourselves by, say, browsing social media. The key lesson of this chapter is that we always have a choice in what we focus on, and by gaining control of that choice, even if it means taking breaks, we can greatly improve both productivity and creativity. Chapter 5. How to better focus on this book. Before diving into his main ideas, Bailey even offers tips on how to read this very book more effectively. He advises putting your phone out of sight, since as soon as our brain feels any resistance to a task, it will hunt for a novel distraction, and smartphones deliver tiny dopamine hits every time you check them. One practical exercise he suggests is to track how often and why you pull out your phone each day. Noticing that pattern can be eye-opening. He also recommends controlling your environment, choosing a quiet spot, removing temptations, keeping a pen and paper handy to jot down thoughts, and even having a cup of coffee, mindful of its long-lasting caffeine, before reading to boost alertness. If focus begins to drift, Bailey says to reset with something easy, like getting up to stretch or making a drink before returning to the work. In short, treat the chapter like a mini experiment. Spot the distractions, eliminate them, and only then dive in. These meta tips underscore the book's message. Be intentional about where you place your attention. Chapter 1. Switching off autopilot mode. One powerful point Bailey makes is that roughly 40% of our actions happen on autopilot. Think about that. Almost half of what you do each day might not even require conscious thought. Because of this, we can easily drift into habit mode, doing the same routines without examining whether they're worthwhile. To break out of autopilot, Bailey introduces a simple framework of 4 types of tasks along 2 axes: productive versus unattractive is unattractive. Necessary work, productive but not fun, like paying bills or sitting through meetings, sits in one corner. Purposeful work, productive and enjoyable, the kind of work that feels meaningful and life-changing, sits opposite it. Then there are the low-value corners: unnecessary work, busy work we only do when avoiding harder tasks, and distracting work, tempting but low-value activities like endlessly scrolling social media. Bailey argues that all these types are battling for our attention every day, and if we run on autopilot, we tend to default into the least useful corners. The antidote is to become intentional. For example, by recognizing that checking email out of habit is a distracting work and not serving our main goals, we can choose to stop doing it constantly. We can consciously move ourselves into purposeful work. Ask, isn't this task really one I'm on earth to do? Bailey notes that we should refill our attentional bucket by taking short breaks, stepping back briefly when needed to recharge and knowledge, then deliberately shifting back to the right quadrant. In this way, we switch off autopilot and start steering our attention. Research even shows that as our mind starts to wander, our eyes actually scan pages or screens more slowly, a reminder that attention and perception are linked. Throughout the day, Bailey says, The more aware we are of what we're choosing to focus on, the better we can stay on track and resist the allure of autopilot distractions. Chapter 2: The Limits of Your Attention. Bailey drives home that our attention is a scarce resource with strict limits. He quotes the line, "There's a finite limit to how many things we can focus on," and backs it with striking figures. For instance, psychologist Timothy Wilson estimates our brains take in striking figures. About 11 million bits of sensory information every second, but we only consciously process around 40 bits of that. Imagine walking through a busy city. Your eyes and ears soak up millions of sights and sounds, but your conscious mind zooms in on only a tiny fraction. Similarly, the act of understanding even one conversation consumes roughly half of our brain's available focus. This is also why working memory, our mental scratch pad, can only hold a few items at once. On average, people juggle about 4 chunks of information in their head at a wet time. Some folks can stretch that to around 7 chunks, using tricks like chunking, grouping items meaningfully. For example, breaking a long number into years or relating list items to people you know. But generally, our brain's attentional space is limited. Bailey likens it to computer RAM. Bigger RAM drains more battery, and in our brain, expanding that space would cost lots of calories. Our brain already uses 20% of that, our body's energy. The bottom line, if we try to focus on too many things, the overflow spills out of consciousness. However, there's a skill Bailey highlights called meta-awareness, noticing what your forward mind is thinking about. This turns out to be a superpower for focus. By paying attention to what you're thinking, instead of just mindlessly watching the thoughts, you train yourself to catch when the mind strays and gently bring it back. Even one study he cites shows that when people consciously notice their minds wandering during a task, they actually performed better on a mystery problem than those who just ignored their mind thoughts. In practice, meta-awareness means detecting your own mind's chatter, using it to refocus on the original goal. On top of that, Bailey reminds us that multitasking is a myth unless one of the tasks is purely habitual. Our brain can handle overlapping habit-based actions, thanks to shifting blood toward the basal ganglia, which handles habits. But trying to split attention between 2 novel tasks will simply exceed our attentional capacity. In other words, it's okay to answer a work email while on autopilot walking, but trying to write a report while multitasking in a new way will backfire. We need to recognize these limits and choose tasks that fit our brains. Chapter 3: The Power of Hyperfocus. Here Bailey finally names the star of the book, hyperfocus. He borrows the term from ADHD research, noting that people with ADHD often can focus intensely. They're just bad at choosing when. But for everyone, hyperfocus means intentionally directing all bad at choosing when. All your attention onto one complex, meaningful task. He defines it as deliberate, undistracted attention so powerful that only one productive or meaningful task consumes your attentional space. In other words, when in hyperfocus mode, you dive so deeply into one thing that nothing else vies for your mind. Bailey stresses that hyperfocus is best saved for the hard, important stuff, the projects that really matter. Simple, routine, or habitual tasks usually take care of themselves, and trying to hyperfocus on them often makes performance worse. For instance, he gives the example of figure skating. When he consciously micromanaged a spin he already knew how to do, he actually performed worse than when he let it happen. Naturally, the classic phenomenon that overthinking a learned skill disrupts it. Contrast, concentrating on a challenging design problem or creative writing would improve with deep focus. Because our willpower is limited each day, we should spend it on things that truly require conscious thought. The benefits of hyperfocus are huge. By focusing on one key task, you keep your main intention in mind and have spare mental space to resist distraction. Bailey notes that This extra attentional space lets you catch yourself if you start to drift. You're not so completely absorbed in trivia that you forget your goal. It also allows deeper thinking about the work itself. As Bailey puts it, one of the best ways to get more done faster, is by preventing yourself from focusing on the things that aren't. In a way, hyperfocus primes us for flow, Csikszentmihalyi's term for being completely immersed in work. Because flow is more likely when there's nothing else splitting your attention. Bailey even breaks down how to enter hyperfocus in stages. First, pick a single object of attention, a complex project or problem that really matters. Then eliminate all distractions around you and within you so that nothing is more immediately compelling than that task. Next, give yourself permission to focus fully on that one thing. As soon as your mind wanders, and it inevitably will, notice that wandering and gently bring your focus back to your chosen task. These steps form a loop: choose, eliminate, focus, refocus. The linchpin of it all is setting a clear intention. Bailey famously insists, attention without intention is wasted energy. In practice, that means before you start, clarify why you are focusing and what you aim to accomplish. If a distraction pops up that doesn't align with that intention, it's easier to dismiss it. Bailey illustrates this with, doesn't align with that intention, it's easier to dismiss it. Bailey illustrates this with a simple rule of thumb. At the start of each day, pick 3 significant tasks you intend to complete. These should be complex, meaningful priorities. If smaller tasks loom, batch them for a different time or treat them as brief palate cleansers between the big 3. This rule of 3 keeps you pointed at the right targets and helps protect your limited attentional space for the biggest challenges. Finally, Bailey reminds us of some key statistics to stay humble. On average, our minds wander 47% of the day, and when interrupted, it can take about 22 minutes to refocus. The good news is that practicing hyperfocus and meditation, as he'll later note, gradually trains your ability to pull yourself back. Think of focus as a muscle. The more you flex it, the stronger it becomes. With clear goals in these steps, you make hyperfocus a repeatable habit rather than a rare coincidence. Chapter 4, Taming Distractions. Once we've chosen to hyperfocus, Bailey warns, we must proactively handle the many magnets pulling our attention away. He draws heavily on research by Gloria Mark and Mary Chervinsky on real-world digital distraction. For example, if instant messaging or Slack is left open, we tend to interrupt our work roughly every 35 seconds on average. People switch between computer apps over 500 times a day. Even glancing at Facebook averages 20 to 30 checks daily for many users. Each such interruption has a cost. Bailey cites a study finding that an unrelated interruption forces about 25 minutes of lost focus before a person returns to their original task. Worse, in between an interruption and the return to work, we often drift into 2 or 3 other tasks unknowingly. As Bailey Riley notes, we don't simply attend to the distraction or interruption and then return to the original task. We become distracted a second time before doing so. In other words, a single ping or tempting notification can derail your flow for the rest of the morning. So Bailey's advice is brutally practical. Shut distractions down before they even appear. He uses apps like Freedom or Cold Turkey to block websites, sets his phone to Do Not Disturb, or leaves it in another room, and even puts on noise-canceling headphones in public spaces. In his routine, once he locks into focus mode, if any notification noise or computer pop-up does occur, he immediately reflects on it. Why did that interrupt me? Then he adjusts his routine accordingly next time. As he says, if I don't disable computer distractions ahead of time, I might as well wave goodbye to my productivity. It's not about willpower. Even a productivity pro like Bailey admits he's not superhuman. It's about managing the environment, so his impulse too admits he's not superhuman. It's about managing the environment, so his impulse to click is under control, not giving it a chance to hijack his brain. Bailey also categorizes distractions so we know how to deal with them. Some are uncontrollable, like a coworker stopping by your desk or a sudden loud noise, and some are under our control, like email alerts or social media. For controllable distractions, the solution is clear. prevent them in advance. That way your brain has no choice but to work on that task. He calls this creating a distraction-free mode, a working state where everything more interesting than your work is removed. Contrast this with reduced distraction mode, which accepts some interruptions for collaborative work. For example, you might allow quick messaging when needed, but only on your schedule. The upshot is, most distractions can be handled by forethought, and doing so will protect your deep work time. On the flip side, Bailey points out we often self-interrupt at just the same rate as external interruptions. Studies show that in office environments, people click around or open new tabs to distract themselves about as often as a colleague actually taps them on the shoulder. Interestingly, team leaders tend to be the opposite. At least 60% of their interruptions come from others, not self-distraction. By recognizing our own role, we see that every time we pick up the phone or open an email out of habit, we're choosing a distraction. With that awareness, we can lean on tools and rituals, like blocking websites, silencing notifications, or simply putting our phone out of reach to make sure the easier choice is to stay on task. Finally, Bailey sums up, to truly tame distractions, we should implement both a distraction-free mode for deep focus, where we remove every object of attention that's potentially more stimulating than our work, and a reduced distraction mode for times when we need to collaborate or be reachable. His own ritual might look like this: launch a website blocker, turn on Do Not Disturb on computer and phone, pour a cup of coffee, and then start working. If anything does break through, note it and improve the setup. Over time, this disciplined approach to distractions becomes a force multiplier. You'll get your best work done faster because you've preemptively managed what tries to steal your focus. Chapter 5, Making Hyperfocus a Habit. Bailey turns inward now, exploring how our own state of mind affects focus and how to train attention like a muscle. He notes several conditions that make the mind wander more: stress, boredom, personal worries, or even just free mental space. For example, when stress is high, say a looming deadline, our brain actually rebels by seeking smaller distractions to cope. Bailey's solution: break big tasks into smaller steps, or find a calmer environment, so stress doesn't push you into fragmentation. On the flip side, pure boredom is also a trap. If a task is too easy or uninteresting, the brain will idle. Here Bailey suggests the opposite approach: make the task a bit harder. This might seem counterintuitive, but by raising the challenge or adding complexity, you engage yourself deeper. He cites the classic flow insight. We enter flow when challenge matches ability and we're fully absorbed. If you can breeze through your work, your mind naturally drifts, so it may actually help to raise the bar so that hyperfocus becomes the only way to handle it. Bailey also points out the Parkinson's law dynamic. Work expands to fill the time allowed. In a traditional distracted office, we might doodle or procrastinate until the last moment. But in distraction-free hyperfocus, he finds the opposite. Tasks get done surprisingly faster. When he finished his blogging tasks in an hour instead of 2, he could either slack off or choose a new challenge. So he did the latter, taking on a more complex project or doubling down on impact work. The lesson: if your meaningful work plate suddenly shrinks, look for ways to fill the expanded time with more depth, new projects, learning, problem-solving, rather than slipping back into busy work. To ensure hyperfocus happens regularly, Bailey underscores practicing it. He suggests scheduling regular focus sessions and gradually building them up, just like training any skill. This means not hitting the gym just once, but setting a routine. If you tell yourself, "I don't have time," question it. Would you skip a meeting with the boss or a workout? Often the excuses fall away when you realize you'll make time for things that truly matter. Over time, repeatedly overcoming that initial resistance makes it much easier the next time. It truly becomes a habit, like a muscle, as he puts it, so that focus sessions feel more natural and longer. And yes, part of making it a habit is accepting the need to take breaks when needed, to recharge the brain. Bailey also explores techniques to increase our brain's raw capacity for attention. He remains skeptical of brain training apps. They tend not to generalize beyond themselves. Instead, he hails meditation, even short, breathing meditations, as one of the best ways to grow working memory and focus. Research notes that people who meditate regularly tend to mind wander less and score higher on focus tasks. For instance, a study on GRE students found that a meditation routine increased their focus time and even raised test scores by about 16%. Over just a few weeks of guided breathing meditation, working memory capacity jumped significantly in one study. Bailey himself makes meditation a daily habit, starting with just a few minutes and building up. He explains that the exact length isn't important, only consistency is. The trick is that meditation, and similarly, mindfulness practices, force you to keep your attention anchored to something tiny, like the sensation of breathing. Bailey notes an insightful principle. The smaller the object of attention, the more your mind will wander, but the more you expand your attentional space as you focus on it. In other words, focusing on a small point, like breath, is hard, and your mind will stray a lot. But each time you bring it back, your brain's ability to handle more information grows. Over time, this makes you better at maintaining intentions and slipping into hyperfocus. He quotes a personal example of spending a week intensely focusing on the tip of his nose or other tiny details, and then finding himself far more productive afterward. Bailey also encourages applying hyperfocus in everyday life. For example, at home, you can decide to hyperfocus on having a meaningful conversation. Really listen instead of mentally rehearsing your response. He points out that quality of attention can mean even more than quality of time with someone. Being truly present is a gift. Altogether, the message of this chapter is that focus isn't just an on-off switch. It's a condition of the mind we cultivate. By practicing focus and its sibling, mindful relaxation regularly, we build mental stamina. As Bailey says, each time we pull our wandering mind back to attention, whether in meditation or work, we heighten our executive functioning, how much control we have over our attention. Over weeks and months, those small gains add up, making hyperfocusing easier and more automatic. Chapter 6. Your Brain's Hidden Creative Mode. Halfway through the book, Bailey pivots to a surprising insight. Letting the mind roam, what he calls scatterfocus, is also a vital superpower. He calls scatterfocus the brain's creative, visionary mode. In this wandering state, you aren't concentrating on external tasks at all. Your attention drifts inward. Bailey emphasizes that this can be extremely useful. When you allow your mind to daydream or relax its tight focus, 3 big benefits happen. You set intentions and plans for the future, you recharge mental energy, and you get creative ideas. Imagine solving a problem only after you stop pushing it. That's scatterfocus at work. Bailey acknowledges we have a strong bias against this mode, though. A notorious psychology experiment, the so-called shock test, showed that many people would rather give themselves an electric shock than sit quietly with their thoughts for 15 minutes. The majority of men in the study, 71%, even shocked themselves a second time just to avoid being alone with their minds, whereas only about 26% of women did the same. It's human to flee from boredom or from facing inner worries. Part of Bailey's mission is normalizing scatterfocus, reminding us that an idle, wandering mind can be a friend, not just a source of guilt. Part of the reason we struggle is that our brains are wired to chase novelty, pleasure, and threats, the quick dopamine hits of shiny objects or news headlines. In the old environment of evolutionary survival, noticing something new or dangerous could keep us alive. Now advertisers and algorithms relentlessly feed that instinct, from junk food to social media. These things worked for us once, but now we overindulge. As Bailey puts it, our biggest fears and desires have largely moved from the external world into our own heads. Knowing this, we can deliberately choose to scatter focus at appropriate times. Instead of resisting a wandering mind, we can ride it for creativity. For example, when you're stuck on a problem, taking a walk in nature or letting yourself daydream in the shower can seed insights. Bailey quotes Steve Jobs in Spirit, "Sometimes the right answer comes when you're looking away." The key is intention, deciding to let your mind play rather than just checking your phone or doom scrolling. By doing this on purpose, we transform supposed wasted time into strategic downtime. Chapter 7. Recharging Your Attention. Bailey now explores how to use scatterfocus and rest to recharge our cognitive batteries. He reminds us of John Lubbock's famous idea that true rest is not idleness. Lying on the grass and listening to water or watching clouds isn't a waste of time. It's renewal. In Bailey's terms, scatterfocus itself is a form of rest and planning. Regularly stepping back from focused work lets you refill mental energy, which in turn makes your focus sessions longer, more resilient to distraction, and more intentional. He identifies clear signals that it's time to recharge. If you notice yourself switching tasks rapidly, feeling reactive instead of intentional, or suddenly gravitating towards mindless work, like lots of email or social media when you should be concentrating, your brain is warning you. Its attentional tank is low. Other clues are simple. If reading or decision-making suddenly feels laborious, or you find yourself unconsciously drifting into scatterfocus, getting lost in thought without intending it, these are hints to take a real break. What makes a break truly refreshing? Bailey warns that not all breaks are created equal. Grabbing your phone and scrolling through apps is like jumping out of the frying pan into a milder fire. You're still using attention, just on something else. Instead, choose activities that are low effort and engaging. He suggests things that feel effortlessly enjoyable. Hobby projects, walks, light reading, puzzles, or a creative pursuit. Time in nature is a big one. Studies show that spending time outdoors can boost creative problem solving by up to 50% and lower stress hormones by about 16%. Even brief exposure, like walking under trees, has measurable health and mood benefits akin to a large income gain. Other ideas, going for a run or gym workout, as long as the effort is steady and enjoyable, listening to music or an audiobook, or simply doodling. The common thread is that these breaks give your mind something pleasant, yet not taxing, allowing it to wander and recover. Bailey also gives some timing rules based on how our bodies work. Mental energy tends to ebb and flow in roughly 90-minute cycles, like the stages of sleep. So as a rule of thumb, take at least a short break every 90 minutes, or even aim for 15 minutes of rest for each hour of intense work. In fact, data from productivity tracking showed the most productive people often worked about 52 minutes, then broke for 17. The principle: break before you absolutely feel you need one. The best time to take a break is before you need to, Bailey notes, because once your focus has cratered, it takes longer to rebuild. Pay attention to your own daily energy swings, too. Many of us have morning slumps or post-lunch dips. These are ideal moments to step away and let your mind settle. When you sense a decline in productivity or engagement, switch gears. Even a quick few minutes can restore enough clarity to keep you going strong. Lastly, Bailey underscores that sleep is the ultimate recharge. He humorously posits that for every hour of sleep lost, you lose 2 hours of productivity, and backs it up by saying that being sleep-deprived can shrink your attention span by up to 60%. So if you're tired, you literally have less mental space to hold ideas or focus. People who pride themselves on getting by on little sleep are usually not realizing that their peak ability has plummeted. In practice, this means prioritizing a solid night's rest. It's not optional if you want your mind to be sharp and your focus intact. Chapter 8: Connecting Dots. This chapter highlights how scatterfocus pays off in creativity and insight. Bailey uses the metaphor of dots for bits of information or ideas we've encountered. The more dots we have, the more connections we can make between them. Scatterfocus turns on our brain's default network, a loose, wide-ranging mode where many parts of the brain interact and let ideas jump around. This is why famous insights often come during unrelated activities. Archimedes in the bath, Newton with a falling apple, or Richard Feynman listening to topless bar chatter while scribbling equations. Each of these moments was scatter-focused, not active work. One fascinating phenomenon he mentions is the Zeigarnik effect. Our brains tend to fixate on incomplete tasks. If you leave a problem hanging in your mind and then switch away to do something else, those subconscious connections keep working on it. For example, Bailey tells a story about a math puzzle involving the number 8,549,176,320. The answer, it contains all digits 09 in alphabetical order, only came to him later while doing a mindless task of alphabetizing his bookshelf. The partly solved puzzle sat in the background of his mind, and when his conscious attention was relaxed, suddenly the pattern became clear. This illustrates how walking away, scatterfocusing, can trigger insight triggers. To maximize this connecting of dots, Bailey offers tips. One is to seek out rich environments during scatterfocus. Browse a bookstore, watch people at a cafe, explore new museum exhibits. Novel surroundings introduce many new dots of information and stimulus. Then later, you might move to a quieter, simpler setting where your mind can freely combine those new dots. Another tip is to write down your problems before switching tasks. Putting a question on paper or in a worry list or notebook can offload it from active thought, letting the subconscious mull it over. He even suggests keeping a list of problems at the end of each day, alongside your rule of 3 tasks. Finally, he endorses sleeping on problems in a literal sense. Legend has it that Edison and Dali would hold an object while napping so that when they drifted off and dropped it, it'd wake them with a fresh idea. In each case, the brain continues working on a problem while the conscious mind rests. The big takeaway is, creativity often needs quiet incubation. By collecting interesting dots through learning, conversations, new experiences, and then giving yourself permission to scatter focus, your brain can weave those dots into novel solutions. It's a synergy with the earlier advice. Deep focus and relaxed focus are 2 sides of productivity. Hyperfocus drives you down one path. Scatterfocus lets you wander in the woods and come back with treasure. Chapter 9, Collecting Dots. Here Bailey explains how to build that reservoir of dots in the first place. The gist is that you want more and better pieces of information to connect later. He notes an intuitive but important point. Prior knowledge is like expertise. If you already know a subject well, it takes less mental effort to focus on related new information because your brain can chunk and organize it quickly. For example, an experienced pianist sees complex music as patterns, chords, melody lines, rather than isolated notes. The more dots you have in your mental library on a topic, the easier new related information slots into place. In other words, focus and understanding are filtered through what you already know. Bailey quotes a catchy line, "No 2 pieces of information are created equal." This means we need to be selective in what dots we gather. There is an almost limitless supply of data out there, but our attention is finite. So we want high-value dots, those that are both useful and engaging. For instance, in-depth learning, like reading well-researched books, listening to thoughtful interviews, or having deep conversations, usually yields richer dots than skimming social media or watching fluff entertainment. A good litmus test: the best dots will serve your goals and hold your interest. TED Talks are a perfect example of balanced dots. They're often practical or inspiring, useful, and delivered in a compelling way, entertaining. It's also helpful to consume a mix of related and unrelated information. Learning more about your field adds to a constellation of dots around your expertise. But exploring something completely different can be just as valuable. It might give you a fresh perspective or random connections. For example, an engineer reading poetry or a psychologist learning jazz can spark novel ideas they wouldn't get by only staying in their usual domain. Bailey advises that if you're unsure whether to spend your attention on something, ask yourself, how will my life or goals be different after I do this? If it doesn't add anything meaningful, it might not be worth your precious attentional space. Finally, Bailey categorizes information into levels of value. The most useful is dense and actionable, think academic papers or detailed tutorials. A step down is balanced content, books, podcasts, documentaries that are both informative and well-made. Purely entertaining content, like some reality TV or clickbait, is likened to mental junk food. It has its place for leisure, but it adds little to your future problem-solving ability. By consciously filling your mind with high-quality dots, you are laying the foundation so that later, scatterfocus can more easily connect those dots into innovation. Chapter 10, Working Together. In the final chapter, Bailey expands focus management beyond the self to our mood, body, and environment. First, he highlights how happiness and positivity tie into focus. Citing Harvard researcher Sean Aker, he notes that happy people are about 31% more productive than average. This isn't about forced optimism. Bailey warns that just telling yourself, "I'm happy," can backfire if you haven't put in the work. Instead, he suggests genuine habits for raising your baseline mood. Practice gratitude by writing down what you're thankful for each day. Keep a brief journal, meditate, or do small acts of kindness. These activities might seem unrelated to work, but by boosting your day-to-day happiness, they actually improve your ability to focus and create. He also gives a sobering tip for dark moods. If you find yourself getting overwhelmed or negative, write down your worries. The act of writing makes those thoughts explicit, and, due to the Zeigarnik effect again, your mind will loop on them. Interestingly, this means simply acknowledging a problem can sometimes work it out subconsciously. In contrast, forcing a positive spin prematurely can shortchange the coping process. Next, Bailey stresses working in tune with your energy rhythms. Everyone has a biological prime time, a chronotype, when they naturally have more energy and alertness. He suggests tracking when your focus feels sharpest versus sluggish. Only during your high-energy windows should you tackle the toughest tasks. He even humorously notes that while some studies claim Monday is the worst day for focus, his own experience was the opposite. What matters is your personal pattern. Bailey also discusses how we use stimulants strategically. For instance, moderate caffeine can reliably boost focus and physical alertness, but only up to a point, around 200 milligrams, or one strong coffee. Beyond 400 milligrams, you often get jittery anxiety. On the other hand, alcohol might boost creative idea generation, the classic beer brainstorming, but it reduces our ability to concentrate. The key is using these substances with awareness of your own response. As Bailey notes, implementing individual tactics with an awareness of how well they actually work for you is key. In practice, one person might rely on a morning coffee ritual, another might skip it to stay open to creative thoughts. It depends on what the task demands and how your body reacts. Finally, Bailey examines the social context of workspaces. He points out that open-plan offices do foster collaboration, but they also significantly increase distractions. In fact, studies find that people in open offices distract themselves about 64% more often than if they had separate offices. Interestingly, colleagues in an open space do tend to be more polite about not interrupting each other, but the ambient noise and visual stimuli still tend to fragment focus. The takeaway is to be mindful of your setting. If you need deep individual work, consider finding a quieter spot, even temporarily. If collaboration is the goal, then open spaces or shared war rooms might be great. Throughout the book, Bailey returns to a central maxim: intentionality. He reminds us that every strategy, whether it's scheduling breaks, picking tasks, or even the workspace you choose, should be guided by clear intentions. Focus is not just about working harder, it's about working smarter on what truly matters. By combining all these lessons, choosing where to focus, minimizing distractions, balancing hyperfocus with scatterfocus, and taking care of one's mind and body, anyone can reclaim control of their attention in our distracting world.